So the UFC heads to Mexico City this weekend for UFC Fight Night, Brandon Moreno versus Steve Erceg. And in this video, I will be giving my full card breakdown along with a prediction for every single fight on the card. And I actually think that the UFC put together a very solid fight night card here. We have some very good stylistic matchups. We have some very good matchups to where I've kind of been back and forth on who I'm going to pick. And whenever that's happening, that means we got some really good matchups. And another very important element that I want to point out before we get into this is the elevation factor, right? We talk about this whenever the UFC goes to Utah and goes to some of these places. The elevation is something that we're going to have to keep an eye on because sometimes we see it get to certain fighters. We see fighters tend to fatigue a little bit quicker. We see guys not have the same type of gas tank, not have the same type of energy. So that's something that'll be very important to watch come fight night. But let's hop into this, starting with the very first fight of the evening between Austin Hubbard and Mederos. This is an interesting fight here because I think Mederos is someone that I've been very impressed with, right? Comes over from Fury, comes into the UFC, gets the big Contender Series opportunity, goes out there and gets a nasty finish over Isakov. That'll put you on notice right away. Anytime you can get a finish on the Contender Series, that's what Dana's looking for. That makes his UFC debut against Landon Quiones, and he gets a decision win, right? And I think Landon is a solid opponent, but I don't think he's a world beater, right? But again, I tend to give guys a little bit of a pass in that UFC debut, right? I expect some bumps and bruises. I don't expect to see always a spectacular performance, right? Because that is your big opportunity. He's a guy that he's well trained, trains over at Factory X Muay Thai, right? So he's a very seasoned guy when it comes to the striking. He's very good on the feet. He's speedy, he's fast, and he has dynamite when it comes to the striking. And I think that that is going to be the difference in this matchup is the speed and the power on the side of Mederos, because a guy like Austin Hubbard, right, comes off of the Ultimate Fighter, Team Chandler. He's someone that's just, right, we saw against Kurt Holobaugh, who I think Kurt is a solid opponent, right, but he's kind of just a veteran at this point, right? I know he worked his way into the UFC off the Ultimate Fighter, and he kind of had this long journey, but, you know, like you're getting subbed by Kurt Holobaugh, right? And I know Kurt is solid, but I look at a guy like Mederos, who's fast, who's young and hungry, like, I just don't know, man. And then he goes out there and gets a decision win over Figlak, which is his most recent win, and then he loses to Alexander Hernandez by split decision. So not a terrible loss there, right? But I just think this comes down to the fact that Mederos is going to be faster. I think he's more dangerous on the feet. And when it comes to the grappling, like, is Austin Hubbard going to be leaps and bounds above Mederos? I don't think so. I don't think so. And if Mederos can stop the takedowns, keep the fight on the feet, keep it at his range, I think his speed and precision on the feet is going to be a problem. I don't know if he's able to find a finish in this fight. I could see it, right? But I think Austin Hubbard is one of those guys, he's just he's durable. He's a hard guy to put away. I mean, I could see a finish, like I said, for Mederos, but I'm going to say a decision here. I think that his speed, his timing, and his striking is going to be the difference in this matchup. And I think that his takedown defense is good enough. I don't think Austin is that great of a grappler. So I'm going to side with Mederos to get this one done by decision. Moving on, we have Jamal Emmers versus Gabriel Miranda. Now, this is a little bit of a tricky matchup here because I know a lot of people are going to be so quick to just jump at Jamal Emmers to win this thing. And I know Gabriel Miranda is someone that, you know, he's just kind of, you know, since he's gotten to the UFC, loses to Benoit Saint-Denis, and it's like, okay, like Saint-Denis was looked at as this savage on the rise in the division, and it just hasn't really panned out for Saint-Denis. So the more we've seen that, how bad does that loss age, right? I know Saint-Denis still very good, but that's something, you know, I think to look at there. Then he goes out there and gets a submission over Shane Young, and he's coming off of a loss to Morgan Charrier. So he's had a pretty solid, you know, he's had some pretty solid competition since he's gotten to the UFC, right? I know Charrier just got banged around by Nathaniel Wood, but Gabriel Miranda's got dangerous submissions. He doesn't have particularly good striking, right? A lot of his game is going to resort on trying to get to those submissions. And my question is, are you going to be able to get a hold of Jamal Emmers and put him in those types of positions? Because what we've seen from Jamal Emmers is this guy, he is susceptible to being submitted. If you could get Jamal Emmers down, if you can control him, you can find a submission. But what we've seen from Emmers, good clean boxing, good striking on the feet. He's got some pop in his hands. But he goes out there and he gets his finish over Dennis Buzukja. And I know a lot of people want to talk about, the finish over Dennis. I don't think Buzukja is someone that really should have been in the UFC. I've said that time and time again. So that win I take with a grain of salt, right? And then he's coming off of a finish loss here to Nate Landwehr. I just don't know how good that looks, man. I think Nate Landwehr is, he's solid, right? He's kind of a fun fighter, and he's going to go out there and get himself into a scrap, but he's not super technical, doesn't have good defense, and the fact that, Emmers had moments there, especially early in the fight, Nate Landwehr's durable, and if you can't get him out of there, he can come back and haunt you as the fight progresses. It's very like Diaz-esque when you talk about Nate Landwehr, right? Takes a bunch of damage, and then you start to slow down, and then he pours it on you. That seems to be how Nate is able to get it done. So early, like we saw Emmers, man, like he's explosive and he's dangerous. And can he go out there and do that to Gabriel Miranda? Like, I don't know. I see this fight could go either way. I could see Miranda taking him down, finding a submission as Emmers starts to fatigue and all those kinds of things. But ultimately, I'm going to side with Jamal Emmers in this fight. I think that he is able to win a decision. I think that Gabriel Miranda, I think that as the fight plays out, he may find some success with the grappling, but I think on the feet, he's a step behind. I think Emmers' boxing is going to be a little bit too much for him to where he will become desperate to look for the takedowns to where maybe Emmers can get him out of there, right? But I just side with Jamal in terms of the speed on the feet and banking on the fact that he can stuff the grappling that Gabriel's going to bring to the table. But like I said, I would not be shocked if Miranda pulls this off. I think that he absolutely has the submission ability to be able to get Jamal out of there. So, and the longer this fight plays out, I feel like it favors Gabriel Miranda. So I'm counting on Jamal getting ahead early on. I think Jamal Emmers is able to pick him apart on the feet and get it done by decision. Moving on, we have Rafa Garcia versus Vince Pichel. This is a hard one for me, man, because I like Vince Pichel. I love the OGs, right? That OG style, guys that they move forward. They're like, man, I just want to throw down. I want to let the big hands fly. I want to try to put you out. I want to be entertaining. I want to be fun. That is Vince Pichel. But he's a guy he's 42 years of age that doesn't have a crazy amount of experience, right? We've seen guys that are 42 that have 30 plus fights, right? Vince Pichel is a guy that doesn't even have 20 professional fights, right? So he's 14-4, but he's 42 years of age, right? In the last couple fights here, right? We know that he could go out there and he can outpoint guys. He has good striking, but really where his bread and butter has been is these guys that don't really possess any type of threat, right? They're not super powerful on the feet. They're not super fast. Like, look at the competition, right? Roosevelt Roberts, he's a young guy, right? And he's pretty speedy, so that's a solid win. Jim Miller, right? I mean, I know that's almost 5 years ago, so a little bit of a different Jim Miller then. But then he gets Austin Hubbard, Austin Hubbard's not particularly fast, right? He's not a super dangerous opponent. So you see what I'm saying? Like, the matchups that Pichel has had, he's been kind of, fights, takes time off, comes back. So you don't really know what you're going to get from Vince Pichel other than the fact that he's going to move forward. He's going to get himself into a scrap. He lost to Mark Madsen, and then he lost to Ismail Bonfim, who is a very dangerous guy. So Vince has shown that, he's a little bit slower now, but he's still a guy that can hang around, man. So I'm biased because I want to pick the OG. But I look at Rafa Garcia, right? And he goes out there and he gets the win here, goes out, beats Clay Guida by decision, but he's coming off of a finish loss to Grant Dawson. And I'm like, is Rafa Garcia, like, he's not super dangerous, right? And I know he's got decent striking. He's someone that can put it together. He's got good submissions. We saw that against Ronson, right? But I just don't know, is that enough to beat Vince Pichel? Like, I know Vince is 42, believe me. And when guys get that old, it's like we're starting to see the end. So for those reasons, like Shark Tank, I'm out. No, I'm going to go Rafa Garcia by decision here. I think that his volume and activity, and even if he decides to mix in a little bit of the grappling, I think that can steal some of those rounds. But I do expect an actual competitive fight here. I think that Rafa Garcia is going to be a little bit ahead when it comes to the output. I think when he mixes things together, that is going to score more for him. And I just think that the age on the side of Pichel is not going to do him many favors in this fight. I don't think Rafa is a world beater, but he's almost 31. He's younger. He's a guy that he's not a scrub, right? He's pretty well balanced. And I think that if he goes out there and does what he does, gets in the face of Vince Pichel, just kind of picks and pokes at him, I think that he can win a decision and outscore Vince Pichel. I'm going to go Rafa Garcia by decision, but I'll be rooting for Vince Pichel in that fight. Julia Polastri versus Lupi Godinez. I'm going to go Lupi Godinez in this fight. I'm going to say by decision, right? And in this type of matchup, I think this is very straightforward. Like Lupi Godinez, she needs a win, right? Last win was a split decision over Tabitha Ricci, right? But she's coming off of 2 L's. One to Virna Jandiroba by decision. Like, you made it through against Virna Jandiroba, who has outstanding submissions. So I know she lost, but, you know, something to kind of take away there. And then lost to Mackenzie Dern. So she's fought 2 dangerous submission specialists, right? So those type of matchups, they kind of make you reserved in the way you fight. You kind of hold back a little bit. You're not exactly going to be, you know, fighting the exact same. You're going to be a little bit hesitant to let things go because you're afraid to be taken down. You're afraid of the submission threat. And I think that that's made Lupi fight a little bit more hesitant than what we've seen in the past. So I think in this fight, she's going to be a little bit more aggressive. Hopefully she sticks to her game plan. That's going to be the key in this fight. But I think that she's just better than Julia everywhere outside of maybe the submission threat. I could probably give that edge to Julia because she's someone that does have the ability to finish people on the ground. She does have a well-rounded skill set, right? And we saw that on the Contender Series when she, you know, found the rear naked choke. That was very impressive. Loses her debut to Knudsen and then goes out there and beats Corey McKenna by split decision. I just think she's going to be stronger in the grappling to where if Julia tries to entertain in that area, I just think having fights with Mackenzie Dern and Virna Jandiroba, this is going to feel like a step down in this matchup for Lupi to where she lets her hands go, she gets ahead on the scorecards. I think Lupi Godinez is able to rely on her boxing to pick apart Julia and win a decision here. I'm going Lupi Godinez. Moving on, we have Melky Costa versus Christian Rodriguez. This is one of those fights that I've been going back and forth on because with Melky Costa, he's someone that both of these guys are 2 dudes that I just kind of have doubted, right? I just haven't been super high on what they've done since they've been in the UFC. But what we know about C-Rod is this is a guy that, you know, if you put a prospect in front of him, he's probably going to win. That's what we've seen in his UFC career. He was able to upset Raul Rosas Jr. We saw him beat Cameron Simon, beats Isaac Dalgarian, loses by sub to Julian Erosa, and then he, you know, stops the hype train in Austin Bashi, humbles him and gives him an L, right? So what we've seen from Christian Rodriguez, he's a smaller guy, he's fast, he has good boxing, and he has a very well-rounded skill set. I know people like to talk about the striking, but he does have good submissions and good grappling of his own. And by the way, he's got a pretty good team behind him, right over at Rufus Sport, you know, out in Milwaukee, you know, with the Pettis brothers, and they have some good guys out there, right? So good camp out there. And I think that he's going to be very prepared coming into this fight because with Melky Costa, you have to be. This is a guy that has a very, very unique style, man. And he's someone that I've really started to take a liking to, specifically after that submission victory over Andre Fili. While I was critical of Fili saying, look, he kind of put himself into the guillotine, right? He kind of had, he had his head out, then he put his head back on the hip, and I'm like, what are you doing? Right? He basically helped Costa finish the guillotine choke, right? So that was kind of a bad look for Andre Fili. But what you can't deny about Melky Costa is this guy is fun to watch, man. I like his striking. He's got a very dynamic style on the feet. He's, you know, maintains range really well. He's got some very dynamic kicking arsenal, and I like everything about him. I think he's very busy on the feet. He's very entertaining, but the X factor for him is if you can get to him, crowd his space, you can find a way to get this guy out of there, and you can make him not fight his fight. If you allow Costa to sit around on the outside, spam those kicks, and move around, he's going to be a hard guy to beat. However, I struggle to see C-Rod winning this fight. Well, I could see him winning this fight, right? Because I think that he's going to be faster. I think he's going to try to get into the phone booth and turn this into more of a boxing match to get rid of some of the long, rangy weapons that Costa brings to the table. But what scares me about Christian Rodriguez, when I look at a fight with Julian Erosa, we saw he got subbed. And when I look at this and you want to ask me who's a better submission artist than Mel Costa and Julian Erosa, I mean, I like what I've seen from Costa when it comes to the grappling. So I'm going to say that Melky Costa is able to pull this thing off by submission. I'm going to say in the second round, I think Christian Rodriguez has a good first round, gets to the boxing, is able to kind of manage the distance, get in close, and start to let some of those combinations fly. But I ultimately think that if Costa feels uncomfortable, he will grab a hold of C-Rod, look to initiate the grappling, and find a submission somewhere in those exchanges. I know C-Rod's got good grappling of his own, but I think Costa's at a little bit of a different level with the submission abilities. And it gives me with Costa these Oliveira type of feels, man, to where it's like on the feet, he's dangerous. He's kind of hard to, he's hard to deal with. And then you forget about the submission abilities at times, right? I mean, you don't forget about it, but you get so caught up in the striking, and then you're like, oh crap, this guy got a hold of me, and he's a real submission threat here. I think that's what we see in this fight. I'm going to say Costa finds a submission, but C-Rod is very skilled, he's very fast, and his boxing may be an issue in this fight for Costa, but I'm going to pick Costa to get it done by sub. Moving on, we have Gautier versus Jose Medina. Now, this is a weird one because Araba should absolutely win this fight. He's a monster, man. He's a specimen. He's big. He's dangerous. He's powerful. And he's someone that can shut anyone's lights out at middleweight. And he's someone that is definitely someone to keep your eye on, right? And we've seen that, coming off of the Contender Series, goes out there and gets a nasty finish. And we're all looking around, right? He's from Cameroon. He's this big guy, and it kind of gives people that Francis Ngannou type of vibe. This big, strong guy, big power in his hands. And I do believe that he is the better fighter here. What concerns me is Medina is someone that is definitely not more skilled, definitely not a better fighter in my opinion, but he is made of cement or something. He is not someone that you can just put away, right? It's just, he's a very hard guy to put away. And what we've seen in these, two fights here on the Contender Series, he loses a decision to Magomed, right? So it's like, okay, that not a ton of power coming on the side of Magomed. Now we have Zachary Reese, who he put some nasty shots on Medina and was not able to get him out of there. But if you want to ask me who's the hardest hitter out of all those, the competition he's faced over his past few fights, Adaba's going to have a significant power advantage. The only thing I get scared of is if Adaba cannot get him out of there, what happens? Does he fatigue? Does he get tired to where we can see Medina pull off an upset? I definitely think that is possible in this fight. However, I do believe that Adaba is that good. Maybe it's too much. Maybe, Medina's able to weather a storm and find some sort of finish or win a decision based off of taking a bunch of damage. Adaba slows down, he puts it on him. Maybe that happens, but that's not what I'm counting on here. I think that Adaba is able to, I'm going to say he finds a finish. I'm going to say he cracks the chin of Medina. I know Medina took some big shots against Zachary Reese. I just think that this is a more explosive and dangerous guy on the feet here in Gautier. I'm going to say Adaba gets this one done and finds a way to crack the chin of Medina and gets him out of there. Moving on, we have Edgar Chairez versus CJ Vergara. This is a great scrap here because we have two guys that are just super scrappy, man. I mean, whenever we're talking about flyweights, we're talking about Energizer bunnies. Very fast. Everyone is pretty much really well-rounded, right? We have some guys that stand out in certain areas, right? But most flyweights, they can fight for days. They have good cardio, good pace, good rhythm, and they have a really well-rounded skill set for the most part, do UFC flyweights, right? Which is what I think makes the division actually very unique. In this fight, I think CJ Vergara is the better boxer. I think he switches around on the feet. He moves in and out of range really well. And if this was just a straight boxing match, I think that he could actually get this thing done. But what we've seen from him, he stacked up the 2 wins, beating Lacerda by finish, goes out there, gets the the decision win over Salvador. But he's coming off of a 2-fight losing streak here. Lost to Asu Almadbayev, not a big deal. Asu's a very talented fighter. And then gets finished by Ramazan Tamirov. So back-to-back, really, really good guys on the rise in the flyweight division, right? So not too terrible there. I know you got finished, but those are two, that's game competition. And then Edgar Chairez, he's coming off of that win, the triangle submission over Daniel Lacerda, and then he's coming off of that loss to Joshua Van at the Sphere. So what I think in this matchup is, I think Vergara's the better boxer, but I think Edgar Chairez is better everywhere else. I think that he's got better kicks, he's dynamic on the feet, and I think that he is a hard dude to deal with in this division. And I know Joshua Van he took the fight on short notice. I picked Van to win that fight, by the way, because of the boxing. So I guess you could see some similarities here with CJ Vergara. I just think that Edgar Chairez is going to have some answers. I think that if he resorts to the grappling, he's a legit submission threat to where he could possibly get Vergara out of there with a sub. And I think on the feet, how do you attack a good boxer? Beat up that lead leg with kicks, mix things up. Don't just sit there and box with him. I think Edgar Chairez will learn from the Joshua Van matchup and come out here and get a submission victory over CJ Vergara. I think he hurts him on the feet, maybe finds a submission. I'll say in the third round, but this is a very competitive fight either way. Good scrap. I'm going Edgar Chairez. I just think he's a little bit more dangerous everywhere compared to Vergara, who's kind of dependent upon the boxing. Moving on, we have Ronaldo Rodriguez versus Kevin Borjas. Interesting fight here because Kevin Borjas is someone who I feel like a lot of people have just kind of, I don't want to say given up on, but they just aren't as high on him as they once were, right? Because he goes out there and gets a nice decision win over Victor Diaz on the Contender Series, and it was like, look, this guy showed us that he's got a pretty good skill set, right? We saw that before getting to the UFC. He's got good power. He's someone that can be very dangerous. But he goes out there and gets picked apart by Joshua Van. Goes out there and gets finished by Alessandro Costa. And that's kind of where we're like in limbo here. We're like, is this guy good? Is he, how's he going to bounce back here to a streaking Ronaldo Lazy Boy Rodriguez, who, by the way, really did himself some favors in the Sphere buildup, right? He was fun at the press conference. He was fun in the buildup, and he goes out there and almost gets put away by Ode Osborne and is able to bounce back and will his way to a victory. So there is no question when it comes to the dog that is Ronaldo Rodriguez. This dude, you're gonna have to completely put him out in order to get this guy out of there. And can Kevin Borjas do that? I just don't think so. What we've seen from Ronaldo, I don't think that he's a world beater, right? I still think that he's got a lot of work to do. He's almost 26 years of age. We saw the submission against Bondar. He's got good submission skills. I think that he's a little bit raw on the feet, but I do believe that his grappling and scrappiness is going to win him this fight. I'm going to go Rodriguez. I'm going to say by decision here. Maybe he finds a sub. Maybe we see someone get finished here. But I think that Ronaldo Rodriguez is just going to bite down on the mouthpiece, scrap it out, mix everything together, and find a decision win in this matchup. I'm going Lazy Boy for the victory. Moving on, we have David Martinez and Simon Oliveira. This is a fun fight here because David Martinez is someone that I've kind of had my eye on here, right? He comes off of the Contender Series against Xavier Franklin and wins a decision. And what I thought was actually a really solid performance because this is a guy that's got a very dynamic arsenal on the feet with the striking. Very dynamic kicks, mixes things up really, really well together on the feet to where it keeps you constantly guessing. And, he's someone that kind of likes his space to operate. And a guy like Oliveira, he's going to try to crush the space. He wants you to fight at this chaotic pace to where he's marching you down, getting in your face, and not allowing you to just stick and move and have that pretty style of fight. So what we've seen from him, comes off the Contender Series and gets a split decision win, right? And then comes into the UFC, makes his debut against Tony Gravely and loses by decision. And then he goes out there and gets finished by Daniel Marcos, who I think Daniel Marcos, he is one of the better bantamweight prospects on the rise, right? So no harm, no foul there, but you got finished and you dropped 2 in a row and you're going in there against someone who's making their debut in David Martinez. So could the experience of Oliveira, is that something he could weaponize in this fight? Sure, his pace and his willingness to kind of just get in your face. I don't think that that's enough to beat a skilled David Martinez. I'm going to say David Martinez finds a second round finish in this fight. I could see, Oliveira toughing it out and us going to a competitive decision here, but I just think the speed, the versatility when it comes to the kicks and the range management on the feet is going to be too much for Oliveira. I'm going David Martinez by finish here. I like the kid. I think he's very good. Moving on, we have Raul Rosas Jr. versus Vince Morales. Now, before we get into the breakdown, I would be remiss if I did not go, Chihuahuas. Raul Rosas Jr., man, is so fun. I absolutely love this dude. I think that he is a fun personality. He's got a very, very hard style to deal with, and he finds himself in a very interesting matchup, though, with Vince Morales, because Vince is someone that has been overlooked a lot in his career, right? He was in the UFC, then he was out of the UFC, and he went on a tear to get himself back into the UFC. But since his return, it has not looked particularly good. Goes out there and gets a hard matchup, right? The UFC said, welcome back. Here's Taylor Lapilus. Goes out there, loses by decision, who's a damn good fighter, and then has a a pretty solid fight with Elijah Smith, who's a guy on the rise, pretty good, double leg takedown, pretty good wrestling, pretty decent boxing. So I saw a scenario, I thought Elijah was going to win, but I definitely saw a scenario to where Vince could find a way to win the fight. So now we have a different style of matchup. We have a guy in Raul Rosas who, since coming to the UFC, we saw him on the Contender Series. The kid was, 17 years old? I mean, setting records out here in terms of being the youngest dude to enter the UFC, right? He's got a very, very dangerous skill set. He has excellent grappling, excellent submissions, and he's not one of these guys that he's just trying to take you down and hold you down and control you. He looks for submissions. He looks for the finish. And we saw that against Jay Perrin. Goes out there, got a reality check from Christian Rodriguez, who is the prospect killer. So it's like, okay, you lost to a good fighter in C-Rod. Then he has just been on an absolute tear. Goes out there and finishes Terrence Mitchell, subs Ricky Tercios, and is coming off of a submission or a decision win over Rick Lang at the Sphere. So Raul Rosas Jr., I think he wins this fight. And I actually think that he finds a submission, I'm going to say in the first round, maybe in the second round, maybe a little later. I think Vince Morales is a seasoned guy, right? He's 34 years of age. He's a very experienced fighter. He's got good submissions. He's gritty, and he's got just a pretty well-rounded out game. But I just don't think where Vince could be a problem, which would be the grappling and the submissions, is going to be an issue for Raul. I think Raul is definitely better when it comes to the grappling. The only thing that scares me is if Vince can stop the takedowns, keep the fight on the feet, and just try to pick apart Raul in terms of the striking. Because while I think Raul is not a scrub on the feet, I don't know that he's that much better, or if he is even a better striker than Vince Morales. We still have some questions, at least I do, when it comes to the striking of Raul Rosas Jr. But the guy he's 20 years old, man. Like, he's going to grow into his own, and he's just going to, he's going to fill out. He's going to get, he's just going to fill out, get a little bit stronger, a little bit better in terms of his explosiveness. But for the age that he's at right now, this kid is special, man. His grappling is very, very good. His technique is outstanding. His entries are perfectly timed. The way he advances and finds submissions, I think he's the real deal. I'm going Raul Rosas Jr. by first round sub. Maybe in the second round, but I'll be bold here. But I think he finds a sub in that fight. Moving on, we have Kelvin Gastelum and Joe Bodybags Pyfer. Joe Pyfer's someone that I've been watching since his amateur days. We had someone at the gym I was at the time who was fighting on a card that Joe Pyfer was on, and all these people were out there wearing these Body Bags t-shirts, and whenever he came out, they were chanting, Body Bags, Body Bags. I mean, it was really a sight, man, over at Art of War up in PA. I mean, Joe Pyfer, he's been a guy that has just been born for the moment, in my opinion. He's someone that actually sent a DM years ago before he even, I think, got to the UFC. I said, hey, man, and he shared it on his story. I was like, you got some serious talent. You're going to make it. And sure enough, here we are with Joe Pyfer. I had to pat myself on the back real quick. Joe Pyfer wins this fight by KO. He is going to be the one to crack the chin of Kelvin Gastelum. Maybe it doesn't happen in the first round, maybe in the second. Joe Pyfer is a different kind of heavy hitter than what Kelvin Gastelum has faced. I know that Kelvin's been in there with the who's who at middleweight. He can't figure out what the hell weight class he's in. He's been at welterweight, middleweight. Sometimes he can make weight. Other times he can't make weight. I mean, Kelvin Gastelum, yes, he had that historic, unbelievable fight with Izzy Adesanya. Outside of that, Kelvin Gastelum he's just not been very professional. Missing weight, all of the BS that's been going on with him. But when you put all that aside, he's a very good fighter. He's got pretty solid boxing. He's got good wrestling, but he's fought the same way his entire career, which in my opinion is very predictable and not super dangerous for a guy like Joe Pyfer. And I know that this loss that everyone wants to talk about was against Jack Hermansson. This was a mistake by the UFC. They should have made this a 3-round fight on a pay-per-view or something like that. They should not have made this a Fight Night headliner to where it was a 5-rounder for Joe Pyfer, because if it was only 3 rounds, Joe would have won the fight. But as the fight played out, he started to slow down, and the veteran experience of Jack Hermansson started to take over. So I take that loss with a grain of salt. Outside of that, Joe Pyfer is as dangerous as it gets in this weight class. I think he's someone that could eventually move up to light heavyweight at some point. He has legit one-shot KO power. He is I've been watching this guy for a long time, man. I saw him, I think it was Adam Mattia was his name, knocked the dude stiff with a left hook before he got to the UFC. He is spectacular. He's got legit power. He has really, really good grappling as well that we don't get to see a ton of. I know we saw him sub Abdul Razak Al Hassan. He is the full package, man. I've been sold on Joe Pyfer since before he even got to the Contender Series. He had the hiccup with Jack Hermanson. I think he KOs Kelvin Gastelum. I know that sounds crazy because Gastelum's known for his durability and his chin, but if you look at these matchups, okay, yeah, he got, lost to, Sean Brady by sub, goes out there, wins a decision over D-Rod after missing weight and basically an entire weight class worth of missing weight. It's just been an embarrassment recently, in my opinion, for Gastelum. I think he gets knocked the hell out by Joe Pyfer. Joe Pyfer is a different dude, man. The power is different. He has good grappling to where if Kelvin tries to resort to that, I don't think it troubles Joe. And it's a 3-round fight this time around. So even if Joe doesn't find a KO, I think he does enough to win a decision. But I think that given how much damage Kelvin has taken in his career, what we've seen so far, I think Pyfer is going to be the guy to crack it. I think Pyfer gets a finish. Moving on to a very interesting co-main event here between Manuel Torres and Drew Dober. I've been back and forth on this one because Drew Dober, he's good, man. He's good. He's technical. He's a well-rounded fighter. And he's just kind of fought murderer's row, man. Like, if you look at this last stretch, I mean, he goes out there and starches Bobby Green. He gets finished by Matt Frivola. He gets the finish over Ricky Glenn. He loses a decision to Renato Moicano. And then, the doctor's stoppage here against Jean Silva, who is an absolute savage on the rise in the featherweight division. So I take a little bit of these losses with a grain of salt. We know that he lost to Islam Makhachev, which, I mean, you can't blame the guy at all. Islam is the pound-for-pound #1 guy in the sport and basically the lightweight GOAT, right? So, he's just had a murderer's row. He's fought some very, very good competition, and we're asking ourselves, is Manuel Torres someone that is in that type of category that is going to be the future of the lightweight division? Because some just average lightweight is not going to beat Drew Dober. But when I watch Manuel Torres, he's someone that I was high on, man. He came into the UFC and he's just been dangerous, right? He comes off the Contender Series, got a nice submission or a nice finish, not a submission, a nice finish. And it's like whenever you get a finish on the Contender Series, you get people talking. Goes in there, gets a KO over Frank, gets a KO over Nicholas Mata, goes out there, subs Chris Duncan, which, by the way, how well is that win age? Because Chris Duncan, he just hasn't gotten the respect that he's deserved, and he has just knocked down or submitted 2 prospects on the rise in his 2 recent fights. So that has actually aged really well for Torres. Then he goes out there at the Sphere and gets knocked out by Ignacio Bahamondes, which, okay, Bahamondes he's a future guy in the division. He's tall, he's 6'3", he's one of the better strikers at lightweight, so I take it with a grain of salt. This just seems to me like we have Drew Dober, who, yeah, he's 36 years of age. He's got a lot of miles on him. He's taken a lot of damage. He is the better, cleaner mixed martial artist here. In terms of the striking, he's a lot more clean. In terms of the grappling, I think that he can hold his own. But I just think that Manuel Torres, man, I know he lost to Bahamondes, but I'm not going to give up on him just yet. I think Manuel Torres is going to find a finish, but I'm going to say a submission over Drew Dober. I'm going to say in the second round because I think Drew is, look, he's good. He's dangerous, and I absolutely think that he could knock out Manuel Torres because Torres, he throws the big ooga booga shots, right? He gets a little reckless, a little chaotic, and he puts himself in the line of fire. And if you do that against Dober, you absolutely run the risk of getting knocked out because Dober's very technical. He's very calm in the chaos. But I honestly think while it's hard to submit Drew Dober, he's a little bit older. He's taken some damage, man. And I think if Torres can land a big shot on the feet, catch him, march him up against the fence, get in close, get the tie clinch, because those knees in close from Torres, they are nasty. And I can see him ripping those to the body, hurting Drew Dober, taking him down and finding a submission. I'm going to say Manuel Torres gets this one done, but I would not be shocked if Dober is able to knock out Torres. Either way, I think someone gets finished. This is a chaotic fight. This is an amazing matchup, but I'm going to side with the youth here in Torres. I'm not going to give up on him just yet. I think that he's able to get this one done, but don't count out Drew Dober. The dude's a savage. Main event time, Brandon Moreno versus Steve Erceg. I was actually really surprised when the UFC booked this matchup because I didn't think Steve Erceg deserved a Brandon Moreno fight. I didn't think that he deserved another top 5 matchup because he's coming off of 2 losses, right? He was the number 10 ranked guy, got a title shot against Pantoja. And I know that kind of made a lot of noise, and it was basically because the UFC was kind of out of flyweight contenders at the time who they could basically just give a title shot to, right? So they, okay. And then he goes out there, they throw him right back in there with a top guy, and he gets knocked the hell out by Chairez. So his 2 losses are against 2 of the top guys in the division, one of the best flyweights of all time in Pantoja, one of the best strikers in the division in Chairez. And I just look at that and I go, well, how are you going to beat Brandon Moreno? Because we saw what Moreno was able to do to Chairez, right? And so I believe that this is a very fun matchup. I think that, yes, Steve Erceg was right there with Pantoja. Erceg's got good, clean boxing. He's got good grappling of his own, and he's a very complete mixed martial artist. I just don't think he really does anything better than Brandon Moreno. Maybe he's a little bit, better with the wrestling, but in terms of the submissions, Brandon Moreno's excellent. In terms of the boxing, Brandon Moreno is excellent. In terms of the submissions, Moreno is excellent. In terms of the footwork, the movement, I think Brandon Moreno's better. So if you're asking me, who's just the better fighter, it just comes down to Brandon Moreno. And I know that he went out there and put on an absolute stinker the last time they were in Mexico against Brandon Royval, to where that just didn't look like Moreno at all. I was like, is that an imposter in there? Where's Moreno? That wasn't him, right? He was scooting around the outside, had no willingness to engage. He just looked checked out, right? He was coming off of the split decision loss in the title fight against Pantoja, and then he bounced back and just looked like he just didn't want to really be in there, right? He just kind of was just trying to coast and maybe win a decision. I don't know. It was very strange. And then he goes out there and reminds everybody, don't forget about me, man. I am that guy in the flyweight division, and puts on just an absolute masterclass against Amir Albazi, who has very good grappling of his own. So Moreno, that's a good sign to me, right? That he goes out there and does that to a dangerous up-and-coming guy in Amir Albazi, to where I just think Brandon Moreno's the better fighter. I just think it's that simple. I think Steve Erceg's not going to out-grapple him. I don't think that he's going to outstrike him. And in terms of the power, I know Steve Erceg was able to find a KO over Matt Schnell. That is not really who Steve Erceg is. People think that he's some people think he's like a KO guy. That's not who he is. He's basically a decision guy, right? He's got good grappling, and he has very good submissions. If he's going to finish the fight, that's normally how he does it, is by submission. Is he going to sub Brandon Moreno? I would be shocked if that happens. He's going to out-grapple Moreno? I would be shocked if that happens. There's 5 rounds to work with. It's in Mexico. As long as Brandon Moreno shows up, I think that he wins this fight. I'm going to say by decision. I think we see a good technical 5-round fight here, to where Erceg will have moments. Maybe he takes Moreno down. Maybe he controls him. Maybe he lands some shots on the feet. I just think Moreno's too good. As long as Brandon shows up and doesn't come out there and have a slow start like he did against Brandon Royval, to where it looks like he doesn't even want to be in there, Brandon Moreno wins this fight all day long. I don't even think Erceg should have gotten this kind of matchup. And to me, the UFC is hoping for a Brandon Moreno win here. This is one of the biggest stars in the flyweight division, and having him back in title contention, something that would be massive for the sport. I think Brandon Moreno gets this one done by decision. Coming off the KO loss to Chairez is Erceg. Maybe Moreno finds a finish, but I think it's going to be by decision. But if you guys enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you do not miss an upload. I would appreciate it. See you next time.